Welcome back to the Drought-Proof Garden. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about plantable starter pots, why I sometimes use them, as well as the pros and cons of using them. By plantable pots, I of course mean any seed starting pot that can be directly planted in the ground without having to first remove the plant. These are often purported to decompose or disintegrate after planting, though this feature is often exaggerated to say the least. To be honest, I avoid using biodegradable, plant-the-whole-thing starter pots whenever possible. Unlike plastic pots, plantable pots cannot be easily sanitized. As such, I would never start tomatoes and peppers in a peat pot, as in my opinion, these plants are more likely to survive past the seedling phase when started using largely sterile materials. Additionally, plantable pots tend to dry out faster than plastic pots. Plastic will trap water, while the paper-like material that comprises most plantable pots will wick it away. Finally, plantable pots cannot be reused from year to year, which on a large enough scale can be a noticeable increase in the cost of seed starting. So, given all the drawbacks, why would I bother with plantable pots at all? Well, in 2 words, transplant shock. Many plants such as squash, cucumbers, sunflowers, and various root vegetables don't really react well to having their roots jostled as they are removed from plastic pots. My experience has been that sometimes such transplants are fine, but sometimes their growth is either stalled for a bit or they will outright die in a few days. I honestly typically have better luck transplanting root-sensitive plants that were started in plantable pots. Being able to just drop the entire pot in the ground effectively eliminates root disturbance during transplant. So why not just directly sow sensitive crops? Well, the answer here is climate, critters, and volunteers. I'll elaborate. Here in Sacramento for much of the year, it's going to be an endless battle to keep the top inch of soil damp enough to facilitate germination. This is a particular problem when starting fall vegetables. Since plants grow slowly over the winter due to less sunlight, I really need to start my fall and winter veggies by early September. Now, here in the Sacramento Valley in early September, we're honestly still seeing daytime highs in the 90s and 100s, and are a good 2 months away from any appreciable rainfall. Keeping sown seeds and seedlings sufficiently damp under such conditions can be done, but it requires more work and diligence than I can realistically provide. Even in places where conditions are more temperate, freshly sown seeds are vulnerable to rodents and birds, and new seedlings can be destroyed far faster by pests than a more mature and resilient plant started in controlled conditions. Few things are more disappointing as a gardener than sowing a bunch of seeds outdoors, only to realize too late they've either been stolen by critters or germinated and dried out before breaking the surface. The second reason I avoid direct sow whenever possible is volunteers. Because I compost pretty much everything that's safe to compost, volunteer vegetable plants like these squash here are very prolific in my garden. In fact, often I have more volunteer squash and tomatoes than I do actual weeds. Even if I didn't compost the leftovers of prior year's gardens as well as all of our food scraps, I'd probably still have plenty of volunteer plants popping up just due to deadfall fruit. This can make direct sow tricky in my garden because it can be hard to differentiate between the seeds that I intentionally planted and volunteers that pop up which may or may not have traits that I desire. I fully realize the proliferation of volunteer veggies in my garden is on me. We compost our food scraps, and my compost doesn't get hot enough to kill seeds. Now, I could throw all of our food waste in the municipal bin, but in an urban setting, free sources of organic matter are rare. It seems economically foolish to waste free compost over a handful of mystery tomatoes and rando squash. I could also make sure my compost has just the right ratio of browns and greens and is of sufficient size to heat up to the point of killing seeds, but that seems like a lot of extra work and could be potentially hazardous in a dense neighborhood setting in a fire-prone region such as mine. It's far easier just to start all of my plants in pots and pull everything else that emerges. All right, let's take a quick look at some of the plantable starter pot options currently available to consumers, starting of course with the peat pot. This is definitely the easiest to find and one of the most affordable options, and those are its 2 biggest advantages. Some of the disadvantages are there are some sustainability and environmental concerns when it comes to peat products. It's not really a renewable resource. Also, what I notice is sometimes roots struggle to work their way through the walls of the container. These aren't really that biodegradable. I mean, they technically are, but it takes a really long time. I've found fragments of peat pots and relatively intact peat pots in my compost that are, a few years old. So roots have to work their way through the pot itself. And in my mind, that can slow growth a little bit, and plants, anecdotally, they seem to struggle when you do that. So what I've taken to doing in recent years is making slits in the sides of my peat pots. What I notice happens when I do this is the root ball, as it expands, if you keep everything damp enough and keep everything well watered, the root ball will eventually burst the pot. And, plants seem to thrive much better when I take this measure. And again, I'm using words like seem to and anecdotally because I haven't exactly collected data. I don't know how I could, pull off what would pass as a scientific experiment to prove that slitting your peat pots improves plant growth. Up next, I'm going to briefly mention, just because I had an extra one lying around, the coconut coir pot. This is a starter pot made from compressed, coconut husk product. And this doesn't really break down. However, once this gets planted in the ground, the whole thing will start to unravel, and roots have really no problem working their way through the unraveled coconut coir. The big disadvantage to these is cost. It worked out when I bought these. I think these are like $1.50 a piece. They came in a package of 6, and they're quite expensive, so it's not really practical to use these on a larger scale. I guess maybe if you're only trying to plant, a handful of plants, fine. But if you need to plant dozens, you're going to go broke pretty quick. So these are out for me as, a practical plant starting option. Here I have some small fabric grow bags that can be used for plant starting. And interestingly, these actually work great. All the plants that I ever started in these tend to thrive. The roots have no problem making it through the pores in the fabric. But the problem that I have is I'm not convinced that these are a biodegradable or organic product. I'm often finding these, several years old, completely intact. And I haven't been able to find anywhere that states exactly what fabric these are made of, but they feel like dryer sheets. The fabric is very similar. I don't think that these are biodegradable. They probably contain plastic, and I'm becoming increasingly wary of plastics, and to whatever degree possible in the modern era, I try to reduce and avoid the use of plastics. All the stuff coming out about microplastics and nanoplastics, that they're probably pretty nasty stuff. So that's why these are out for me as well. So this is a new-ish option. I don't know that it's technically new, but I've only seen them available locally recently at Walmart of all places. These are effectively they're paper. They say that they're made from wood fibers, but that's what it is. It's a paper pot offered by this outfit called Back to the Roots. So I'm very interested in trying these because my experience has been that any kind of paper or cardboard will break down and decompose a lot faster than peat material. Cost-wise, these are on par with peat pots, so that shouldn't be much of a deciding factor. I was concerned because again, they're effectively paper, that it wouldn't make it through germination and getting a plant to a point where it can be transplanted, because is this just going to fall apart on me like wet newspaper? So I actually soaked one for a few hours here in a jar of water, and it's holding together just fine. Obviously I could rip it if I tried, but whipping it around here, jostling it a bit, being a bit rough, it's not disintegrating, so that's a good sign. Would probably still want to be judicious and careful when I water, so that it doesn't, moving these around, that's when it's going to, there's going to be some danger of tearing and having everything spill out everywhere. But I'm really interested to compare these side by side with peat pots, both compromised, slit and whole. So in a couple of weeks here, I'm probably going to be starting some new stuff, or actually a couple of months, maybe starting some seedlings for my fall garden, and these are going to be in the rotation for the first time. Really see how these go. Now, when I start my fall and winter garden this year, I'm going to be conducting something of an informal experiment that compares the performance of peat pots to both compromised peat pots and the fiber pots from Back to the Roots. I'll be interested to see if there's any noticeable variation in growth rate or plant health between the three. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.